It was 7:42 a.m. when Layla stepped through the automatic doors at Terminal C, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie slightly damp from the rain. Her flight to New York wasn't boarding for another 25 minutes, but she liked to be early. She moved quietly, eyes scanning the digital displays. She looked tired. Not messy, just ordinary. Comfortable sneakers, plain black joggers, no jewelry. She carried no rolling bag, just the backpack and a slim folder in her hand. At gate 17, a flight attendant stood by the counter flipping through a tablet. Blonde, mid-30s, neat bun. Her name read Allison. Layla gave a brief smile and walked up to check on the flight. "Hi," she said. "Just confirming, this flight's on time?" Allison didn't look up. "Name?" "Layla Reed." Allison tapped the screen. Her eyes flicked up, then back down again. Are you sure you're in the right cabin? This is first-class boarding. Main cabin's over there." She gestured vaguely toward gate 19. Layla blinked, then smiled faintly. "I'm in 1C. Allison paused, frowning. Then her fingers moved across the screen again. She stared for a beat longer. "Oh," she said, her tone flattening. "Right? Okay." Layla stepped aside without comment, standing near the windows, watching raindrops slide down the glass. She didn't look bothered. She'd been through this before. And behind her, Allison was about to learn exactly who she'd just dismissed. They called first class early, as usual. Layla waited until the initial cluster moved, then approached the boarding door quietly. Allison, now joined by another attendant, Emma, younger, more relaxed, stood on either side of the gate. Layla handed over her ticket. Allison glanced at it, then hesitated again. She looked at Layla, then the screen, then back. "You're in 1C?" she asked, as if double-checking a mistake she was sure had been made. Layla nodded once. "Yes." Allison's smile tightened. "Do you have identification?" Layla raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She pulled her ID from the folder and handed it over. Allison stared at it a little longer than necessary, then handed it back. "Enjoy your flight," she said, too bright, too forced. Layla stepped onto the jet bridge. Emma leaned over toward Allison. "Why'd you ask for her ID?" Allison kept her eyes on the boarding list. "I just like to be sure," she muttered. Emma didn't push, but she watched the next few passengers more carefully after that. Inside the cabin, Layla found her seat, 1C aisle. She sat down, placed the folder in the C back pocket, and closed her eyes. Her fingers rested gently on the armrest as if she were still somewhere else. A few rows back, a businessman adjusted his tie, then looked forward. He noticed her, looked at her hoodie, her seat, then turned to his companion. "You think she's in the right seat?" he whispered. The companion shrugged. They probably bumped her up. Neither of them realized what the crew was about to find out. In the galley, Allison scrolled through the crew manifest on her tablet. Routine check. Confirm catering, check crew assignments, note any VIPs. Halfway down the list, her finger froze. Layla Reed, Senior Director, Federal Aviation Administration, Internal Operations. Her stomach sank a little. She stared at the screen longer than she needed to, rereading the name. Emma leaned in behind her. "Something wrong?" Allison locked the tablet and stepped back. "No. Just didn't expect someone like that on today's flight." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Someone like what?" Allison didn't answer. Back in the cabin, Layla was flipping through the in-flight magazine. Calm, composed? Across the aisle, a flight attendant brought champagne to the man in 1A. None was offered to Layla. Emma walked past and paused. "Would you like anything before takeoff, Ms. Reed?" Layla looked up. "Orange juice if you have it." Emma nodded and disappeared. Allison watched the exchange from the galley, the tablet still gripped tightly in her hand. She now realized who Layla was, and more importantly, who she reported to. She just dismissed a woman who had authority over the very systems that governed their operations. And Layla hadn't said a word about it. Not yet. Emma returned with the orange juice, placed it gently on Layla's tray, and smiled. "Let me know if you need anything else." Layla nodded, her eyes already back on the page. Allison stood at the front of the cabin, her posture too still. She kept glancing at 1C as if expecting Layla to say something, to complain, to correct her, to pull rank. But Layla didn't. She just sat, calm, observing. The captain stepped out briefly from the cockpit, checking with the attendants. Allison intercepted him quickly, speaking in a low voice. "Captain, just a heads up, we've got someone from the FAA in 1C. Layla Reed." The captain raised an eyebrow. "The Layla Reed?" Allison nodded once. He glanced toward the cabin. "Did she say why she's flying today?" "No," Allison admitted. "She didn't say much at all." The captain exhaled slowly. "Well, let's make sure this flight runs tighter than usual, and treat her with the respect her position deserves." Allison nodded again, but the words stung. Not because she disagreed, but because she hadn't. Back in 1C, Layla sipped her juice. She hadn't missed the sudden hush in the crew's tone. She knew the signs when people realized they'd made a mistake, not because of conscience, but consequence. She didn't smile. She didn't smirk. She simply waited. Takeoff was 15 minutes away. And the altitude wasn't the only thing rising. The engines roared to life, the cabin dimmed, and the plane angled gently upward into the cloudy morning sky. Layla leaned back in her seat, eyes closed but listening. To footsteps. To whispers. To how the tone had shifted, how silence took the place of casual judgment. The man in 1A who'd earlier questioned her seat glanced over now and again. Less openly. More carefully. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Allison came down the aisle with a tray of hot towels, her face composed, voice clipped. She stopped at Layla's row, offering one with a forced politeness. "Miss Reed, would you care for a towel?" Layla took it. "Thank you." Allison hesitated. "I wanted to apologize for earlier. At the gate. I didn't recognize eh?" Layla looked at her just long enough to interrupt without speaking. Allison swallowed. "I should have treated you with more respect." A beat of quiet passed between them. Layla finally spoke, her voice even. "Respect isn't about recognition. It's about consistency." Allison nodded too quickly. "Of course. I understand." Layla returned her gaze to the window. "Do you?" she asked quietly, not looking back. Allison didn't answer. She turned and walked back up the aisle, her steps stiff, her hands gripping the tray just a little too tight. From her seat, Layla watched the clouds slide by. It wasn't about punishment. Not yet. It was about seeing who learned without being forced. Cruising altitude. The cabin lights adjusted. Trays clicked open. Pages turned. Layla opened her folder and reviewed a printout, flight crew records, customer service evaluations, compliance summaries. Nothing about this flight, not officially. But this wasn't her first time watching quietly. Emma came by with lunch options. "We have salmon or a vegetarian pasta today." Layla glanced up. "Pasta's fine, thank you." Emma nodded, genuine. No nerves. Just service. She returned minutes later with the tray. "Would you like sparkling water with that?" "Yes, please." Emma placed the drink down gently. "Just so you know, a few of us really do try to get it right." Layla met her eyes. "I know. That's why I'm watching." Emma blinked, uncertain whether it was a compliment or a warning. Then she nodded once and moved on. Allison approached again, slower this time, something in her hand. She knelt beside the seat discreetly. "I didn't know who you were," she said, voice low. "But even before I found out, I should have known how I acted wasn't right." Layla didn't respond at first. Then, softly, "What made you stop assuming?" Allison hesitated. "The manifest." Layla nodded. "Not my answer." Allison blinked. "That's the problem," Layla continued, her voice level. "People only adjust when they see a title. Not when they see a person." The food tray between them stayed untouched for a moment. "I'm trying," Allison said. Layla looked at her. "Then start with that man in 12D. You skipped him during drink service." Allison's lips parted. Then closed. She stood quietly. And walked down the aisle with something new behind her eyes. Not fear. Awareness. Allison walked slowly down the aisle, the drink cart gliding beside her. She glanced at her list, then at the man in 12D. Middle-aged, dark skin, quiet. Headphones around his neck, reading a book that looked worn. His tray was still up. No drink. No snack. Just stillness. She stopped beside him. "Sir, I believe I missed you earlier. Can I offer you something to drink?" He looked up, surprised. Then nodded once. "Water's fine." She poured carefully. "I apologize for the delay." He accepted the cup, eyes on hers longer than necessary. "It happens," he said, but there was no forgiveness in the words, just experience. She stood there for a moment, unsure what else to say. Then quietly moved on. Layla watched it all from the front, one hand still resting lightly on her folder. She hadn't turned around, hadn't needed to. She knew the difference between genuine correction and performative gestures. But she also knew what it meant when someone realized too late that they'd missed a chance to do the right thing when it mattered most, before it cost them anything. She sipped her water, eyes still out the window. No announcements had been made. No authority flexed. Just a small shift, miles above the ground, in a pressurized cabin where judgment had no place to land. About halfway through the flight, a quiet knock came at the cockpit door. A moment later, the captain stepped out. Captain Harrow, early 50s, silver at the temples, calm posture. He scanned the cabin, then walked up the aisle with purpose. He stopped at 1C. "Ms. Reed," he said gently. Layla looked up. "Captain, I just wanted to welcome you aboard and offer my thanks for flying with us." She nodded. "Smooth takeoff." He smiled. "We try to keep it that way." Then his tone shifted, barely perceptible but clear to her. "I understand there may have been some early confusion." Layla's expression didn't change. "Yes, but it's been addressed." He hesitated. "If there's anything I can do personally—" "There is," she interrupted, voice even. His posture straightened slightly. "Of course." She motioned to the empty seat beside her. "Sit for a minute." He blinked but complied, folding into the seat like he knew this wasn't small talk. "I'm not here to report anyone." "Not today," she said quietly. "But your crew reflects the culture you build in that cockpit." Respect doesn't begin at cruising altitude. It begins when people are still at the gate. He nodded slowly, absorbing each word. If a uniform is the only thing protecting someone from bias, she continued, then you have a problem bigger than staffing. Captain Harrow didn't argue. He didn't defend. He simply listened. And that, at least, was a start. After the captain returned to the cockpit, the cabin changed, not with announcements or instructions, but with presence. Emma moved with new attentiveness, stopping at each row longer than usual. Allison, quieter now, adjusted her approach, her words less clipped, her glances more deliberate. The man in 12D was sipping his water slowly, eyes forward, not looking for more. But he noticed. Layla leaned back, hands resting over the folder in her lap. She wasn't taking notes. She was watching the space around her respond, not to power, but to possibility. Across the aisle, the businessman from 1A tapped his phone, then paused. He looked over at her again. This time longer. Then quietly asked, "Are you someone important?" Layla turned her head. "No," she said simply. "Just someone watching." The man frowned slightly, unsure what to make of that. Then nodded. "I see," he said. But he didn't. Not yet. She went back to her seat. In the galley, Allison stood beside Emma, her voice low. "You think she's really not going to file a report?" Emma shrugged. "Maybe not today." Allison looked down the aisle toward 1C. "She didn't have to say anything at all," she murmured. Emma gave a small nod. "Exactly." The rest of the flight passed quietly, but the tension had changed shape. Less denial. More reflection. And reflection, Layla knew, was where real change started. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into New York. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are up." Passengers shifted. Shades lifted. Conversations paused. Layla closed her folder and tucked it into her backpack. Her seat upright, her face calm. Allison passed through the aisle, checking buckles, bags, bins. When she reached 1C, she slowed. "Thank you for your patience today," she said quietly. Layla nodded once. Safe landings matter more than smooth takeoffs. Allison didn't fully understand the words, but she heard the meaning behind them. Behind her, Emma smiled as she moved through the final safety check. The cabin had settled into a kind of silence, not forced, just heavier than usual. Like everyone felt something had happened without quite knowing what it was. In 12D, the man finished his water and folded his hands in his lap. He hadn't spoken a word all flight, but his eyes stayed on Layla for a few moments longer than anyone else's. He'd seen what others missed, what they chose to miss. The flaps adjusted. The hum changed pitch. Layla looked out the window. Raindrops streaked the glass again, this time sideways. The ground was coming up fast. And the real moment was still ahead, how they'd remember this flight once they stepped off. Not the turbulence, but the stillness. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. A few passengers clapped, mostly from the back. Up front, it stayed quiet. Layla remained still as the plane taxied to the gate. She didn't unbuckle early, didn't rush to stand. She just waited, listening. People began to rise. Bags dropped from overhead. Coats unfolded. The man in 1A stepped into the aisle and glanced at her again. This time, no question. Just a nod. She returned it. Allison stood near the exit, smile carefully fixed in place. She avoided looking directly at Layla as she thanked each departing passenger. Emma, however, caught Layla's eye as she passed. "Thank you for flying with us," she said gently. Layla offered a quiet, "You're welcome." Just before stepping into the jet bridge, she paused beside Allison. "You'll remember today," she said, not accusing, just stating. Allison finally met her gaze. "I will." Layla nodded once, then walked away. Behind her, passengers slowly followed. Some thoughtful, some oblivious. The man from 12D gave a small wave as he passed the front of the plane. Allison acknowledged it without speaking. Emma turned toward her as the cabin emptied. "That wasn't just a flight, was it?" Allison shook her head. "No, it had been something else. A mirror." The jet bridge spilled into a polished terminal, all glass and light and movement. Layla walked with a steady pace. No rush, no phone in hand, no signs of needing to prove anything. She passed families juggling strollers, suits tapping at keyboards, airport workers hauling carts. No one looked twice. At gate 32, a man in a navy suit leaned against a column, holding a tablet. He straightened when he saw her. "Ms. Reed," he greeted. "Cars downstairs." "Thanks," she said. He hesitated. There was a call from the regional flight operations office. Apparently the crew realized who you were. Layla didn't stop walking. "Did they file anything?" "No," he replied. "Just notes. About the incident." "Which one?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They reached the elevator. He pressed the button, then glanced at her. "Want to make a statement?" She shook her head. "No. If they're smart, They'll reflect before I have to. He nodded. Understood. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. Before they closed, he added quietly, "They're lucky it was you." Layla looked at him. "No," she said. "They're lucky I didn't let it be about me." And then the doors shut. An hour later, Layla sat across from a conference table in a quiet office near JFK's operations wing. A regional oversight officer, older, glasses low on his nose, flipped through the brief notes she'd handed over. "No formal complaint?" he asked. "No," Layla replied. He nodded slowly. "You sure you don't want something on record?" "I'm sure." He closed the folder. "You know, most people in your position would have raised hell before takeoff." Layla looked at him evenly. "That's the problem. We've normalized yelling as the only way to be heard." He leaned back. "So what now?" "Now," she said, "they get a chance to decide who they are when no one's watching. And if they fail? Then next time," she said, standing, "there won't be a folder. There'll be a report." She slid the chair back gently, collected her bag, and added, "I'd rather give people room to grow than just watch them shrink under pressure." The officer nodded, subdued. "Understood." Layla walked out without waiting for a thank you. She wasn't there for recognition. She was there to remind them what the consequences could look like, without ever raising her voice. The next morning, in a quiet briefing room at the airline's crew headquarters, Allison sat with her hands folded, listening. A senior HR officer stood at the front, reading from a memo. "We had a high-profile passenger on yesterday's flight 221. There was no formal complaint, but there was an observation, and that's more dangerous because it means they're watching without warning." Allison didn't raise her hand. She didn't need to. She already knew she was the reason for the meeting. Emma sat beside her, arms crossed, saying nothing. The HR officer continued. "The passenger was Layla Reed, FA, Internal Operations. She's not just oversight, she trains oversight. She could shut down routes. She could pull certifications." A murmur moved through the room. Allison stared ahead. She felt none of the shock the others did. Just a quiet knot in her stomach, coiled and deliberate. The officer flipped to the last page. "She didn't issue a complaint, but she said something we're taking seriously. Respect isn't about recognition. It's about consistency." He looked around the room. "We're not holding a punishment session. We're holding a mirror." Silence followed, and Allison sat in it, knowing she'd been given something rare. A second chance without humiliation, but not without weight. 2 weeks later, on a different flight out of Chicago, a little girl boarded with her father, hair in braids, holding a stuffed giraffe, eyes wide with excitement. They walked slowly through first class, heading toward economy. As they passed row 1, the girl stopped, pointing. "Daddy, look, there's a lady with a hoodie in that fancy seat." Her father glanced down the aisle. "Must be someone special." The girl tilted her head. "But she looks like us." Layla, seated in 1C again, overheard. She turned slightly, met the girl's gaze, and gave a small, knowing smile. The girl lit up, then hurried along after her father. A moment passed. Then the new flight attendant, young, alert, stepped over to Layla. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Reed. If there's anything you need, just let me know." Layla nodded. "Thank you." She looked out the window again. The plane began to taxi. In the back, the little girl was still watching her, leaning just enough to see forward. Not for recognition, not for status. Just to see someone who looked like her, sitting where they said she didn't belong. And not moving, not explaining. Just being there. Still, quiet, seen, exactly where she was meant to be.